this piano. And then this guy.
Oh, so good.
Yeah. As a young female identifying person, like, you're sort of always waiting for like someone to give you the green light, like, yeah, this is good enough. No one knows the music that you're making better than you. Like, this last process showed me, like, you don't need someone else to tell you this is worthy.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm speaking with you today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today, and also those who might be listening to this interview in the future. My name's Tess Guthrie and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm very honoured today to be joined by Gordi. Thanks so much for having a chat.
No worries. Beautiful opening, and yeah, I'm she, her as well, and it's a privilege to be chatting and be part of this very cool project.
Thanks so much. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how music got started for you, just for anyone who's not super familiar with your work just yet, which they should fix.
Well, I mean, I guess like I sort of started to, become, I don't know, consider myself a part of the music industry probably like 6 years ago. I was at uni full time and I was just kind of like playing live because like I really enjoyed it. I wasn't sort of thinking that I was pursuing a music career necessarily, but then like I kept writing songs and I was like, man, this is the shit. This is what I really love to do. And then I saved up all my youth allowance, just hoarded it into my bank account, and then saved enough money to record one song. I recorded it in Melbourne, and it was a song called Nothing's As It Seems. And I uploaded it to Triple J Unearthed, and they played it on the radio. And like, it was like September of 2014. We got the heads up that it had been added to rotation.
Wow.
And it's not like then like everything exploded. Like, it wasn't like that. It was then like that was the beginning of like, a few years of just like solid touring, saving up as much money as I could to go back into the studio, record another song. At this point, I literally didn't know what Ableton was, what Logic was, what Pro Tools was. I had no concept of like production engineering. I just thought you wrote a song and then you like pressed record somewhere and then it ended up, on the internet somewhere. So yeah, it was quite a journey after that. But like over the years I was, touring with local Australian bands and then, put out a few more songs. Then I sort of got a bit more traction when I put out a song called Can We Work It Out in 2015. And that was sort of the jumping off point for, me talking to labels and things like that. And then I signed with some labels here, Mushroom and Liberation and Jaguar over in the States. And that kind of opens this whole new door for me in the US. And yeah, I started touring with some kind of bigger names and bands and artists that I looked up to for a very long time. And then put out a record and then put out another one, and that's brought me to here.
Amazing. And in terms of production, that's interesting that you mentioned that didn't happen straight away for you and that it was more about the songwriting and releasing songs. So what was it about, what moments kind of led you towards producing your own music?
I think, as a young woman or female identifying person, like, it's across every industry, right? But like, it was just that feeling of like, I'd worked so hard on writing these songs and then suddenly you're like sitting on a couch at the back of some studio and everyone else is like making the decisions. And not in like a controlling way, it just sort of, it kind of is really disempowering. And so because like I had no language in the area of like music production engineering. I had no idea where to start. And so I just sort of felt like I'd get to the studio and then I kind of had no background knowledge to make decisions. Like someone would be like, show me 2 different compressors on a kick drum and be like, which one do you like? And I was like, I don't know, like they both sound the same to me. And it's like, I don't think I realized at that point, it takes years and, and I've only probably got like virtually 6 under my belt of properly trying to listen to what a compressor on a kick drum sounds like. You know, it takes a lot of time and a lot of practice to really kind of hone those skills. And so I think like the thing that made me want to get more into production was just, you know, like feeling more empowered in the studio and being able to make decisions so that, you know, something that I care a lot about, which is my songwriting craft, I could kind of be there right until the end. It wasn't like I was going into the studio kind of handballing it off to someone else, hoping that they'd just kind of read my mind and, you know, and produce something that I wanted them to. And I think, you know, of course, there are lots of producers and engineers that are great at doing that. And I don't think just because you don't have, you know, knowledge about production or engineering doesn't mean you can't be part of that process. But I do think, you know, it requires a lot of kind of engagement and a lot, and a lot of practice. But I still sort of see the songwriting and the production processes as very different processes, you know, which, like, I don't know, I guess that's changed a bit over time. But yeah, like the production side of stuff is really exciting because it's, you know, you've got the song as far as it can go in terms of the writing, and then you're like, all right, now we get to like reimagine it all over again.
Yeah, that'd be a really exciting process to be able to be in the driver's seat for that.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I'm curious about when you were mentioning before that you feel like you can be with the song up until the end of its production stage and not just kind of handball it over to someone else. Do you feel like over the last 5 years, your tracks that you're releasing have changed a lot in their style or their sound because you're able to be with the songs throughout that whole process?
Definitely, because I think when you're working with someone, you know, you can only get so micro in, you know, being like, can you adjust this thing in that particular point? You're
Yeah.
like, there's kind of sometimes you've just got to jump in there and like do a couple of things yourself. So yeah, you know, it has definitely changed. I mean, for example, like the first record that I made, you know, I mean, I was involved in the production from like, let's think about like putting this in here, but like I didn't engineer a single thing on that record. Whereas the second record that I did, like basically half the record were demos that we just kind of like zhuzhed up a bit, you know, in the studio. So yeah, I think that it has, you know, just having a few more of those skills has meant that, I don't know, just like all the little details that I really care about that maybe someone else doesn't, I can just sort of be, you know, kind of really finicky with those and get right in there. And, you know, I think the end of that sort of like journey for me was like finishing that second record, and I sent it off to this good friend of mine, a guy who I've worked with a lot over the years. His name's Alex Summers, and I sent the record to him because I respect his opinion a lot. And I was like, what do you think? And he was like, I've never heard something that sounds so much like you, which I thought
Oh,
was like,
awesome.
you know, that was just the coolest thing to hear. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting at with all of this is like, you know, the production, the engineering stuff, it's, you can just like inject the most amount of yourself into something, which I think is, you know, that's pretty unparalleled.
Mm-mm. I think that's such a powerful thing for songwriters to be able to do as well, because I think it's pretty common to have dreams about what you want the song to sound like.
Mm.
And in terms of technical production, was there anything that you did, particularly when you were still learning about how to produce and you weren't quite at the stage that you are at now? Anything that you did back when you were kind of learning a bit more to be able to have more say or more kind of control over the creative direction of the track?
Yeah, I think I just picked the right people to work with.
Mm.
You know, like who I just mentioned, Alex Summers. I worked with him a lot on my first record, and I just learnt so much from him. Like, and I think that's, you know, so while I'm sort of advocating for, again, for like, you know, learning a lot yourself and doing a lot yourself, I'm the biggest advocate for collaboration. I think if you can find a great producer, a great engineer that you can kind of bounce off and work with, like that's the absolute sweet spot, and that's where you learn so much. Like, and so that period of working with Alex Summers and then working with two other really good friends of mine, Zach Hansen and Chris Messina on this second record. Those three guys have probably been like the most influential for me in like learning about engineering and production. And And interestingly, like Alex and Chris and Zach are probably at different ends of the spectrum, in that Alex, is more of like a layers and maximalist, creates these beautiful kind of cinematic scapes. And, that's probably reflected a lot in my first record, because it was like all that sort of, dense layering, which I love and I was really into at the time. And then my second record was probably a bit of a, reaction to that, just me wanting to try something different. And Chris and Zach were great in that regard, because, we were all of this same mindset of like, what's the bare minimum we have to have here in order to convey the message. So, like all those guys showed me these really different ways of thinking about production, from sort of that macro perspective, like, what's the overall vibe we're going for? What are we trying to achieve? And then I just looked over their shoulder to boil that down to like, what does that actually mean in terms of engineering and production? And so just, I like have this notebook where I've written down every piece of like outboard that I saw in Alex's studio, or, that Chris and Zach work with, and like gradually have probably bought all the equivalent plugins, which are much, much cheaper. So yeah, I think like there's nothing that can really replace, being in the studio with people. And that's kind of where I've learned anything I've learned. And I very much still feel that I'm at the beginning of my like journey with all of this. And I'm sure when we go through this song that we're going to go through, which I made, in 2018 on Ableton, I'll look at some stuff and be like, what the fuck was I thinking doing that? Because like, that's the coolest part about all of this, is that like literally 5 years ago, I had no knowledge of any of this. So like the trajectory at which you learn like is just crazy. So even in the last 2 years, like, you just learn so much from talking with people, watching other people work. And yeah, I'm hoping that growth will just continue.
Yes. And I'm very excited that we're going to be diving into Volcanic, because I think it's one of my favorite tracks off that record, and it's absolutely devastating, in a good way.
Oh, I take that as a compliment. Yeah.
That's what we're here to do. But could you tell me a little bit about the background of the track as well, or how it kind of came to be from a songwriting perspective?
Yeah. So a lot of the second record that I wrote, which is called Our Two Skins, I wrote about a pretty kind of tumultuous period in my life. It was, from the end of 2017 to kind of the end of 2018, really. It was like a year-long period. And I was finishing medical school at the time, which was pretty gnarly. And I was putting out my first record, and I'd been in this really long-term relationship. And then I, with this guy for a while, and then I fell in love with like one of my really good mates. And she really, just kind of, it all came out of left field. And it caused me a lot of, reevaluating of my life. And, I refer to it really as my quarter life crisis. So, about a year later, I was in Stockholm, and I was with my parents, and we'd just watched Hannah Gadsby's Nanette on Netflix, which I'd actually seen at the live show in New York, and I was like so obsessed with it. And I was like, oh, we should watch this. So we watched it one night in our like Airbnb, and then, Mum and Dad and I were kind of talking about how I had this new person in my life, and they were talking about whether I should tell my grandma about it. And my grandma and I were like really, really close, we talk on the phone all the time. And I was like, she's like 95. I just don't want to like complicate our relationship. I don't want her to feel like, I don't know, all that sort of usual shit that anyone who's like going through some sort of, I don't know, like coming to terms with their queerness. And anyway, they were like, we think that you'll regret it if you don't. And then I shut my bedroom door and I wrote Volcanic in about 25 minutes. And I just kind of wrote the lyrics. I didn't write any of the chords. And so I just like I guess it was like kind of like this poem. And a week later I flew to Berlin, and I was doing this festival called the People Festival, which is run by Aaron and Bryce Dessner and Justin Vernon. And they kind of, call a bunch of people and say, let's all go to this location and write for a week and, produce these songs and have a festival at the end. And I was just like, I was in such a like moody, like, you know, all the week's all about collaboration. I was just like on this piano, like feeling all these things on this particular day. And there's this big warehouse like on this river, because the whole festival was at this, it was like an old radio station that they used, like I think that the Nazis used or something. But anyway, it's a beautiful building, and it was like all dilapidated, but it's been repurposed, and now like Neil Fram has his studio there. So like I'm sitting at this like piano in this enormous warehouse, and I kind of just started playing this like this riff on the piano, and then I kind of started singing these verse words that I had for Volcanic, and then I was like looking up volcanoes on Wikipedia and reading, like I was like eruptive, destructive. So I just like started writing all these words down, and yeah, by the end of the day, I kind of had the song, and like I've got a couple of like iPhone like recordings of like doing the you know, like doing these demos, and you can hear people were using like metal like grinders in the background in the warehouse. So I'm like trying to do this like demo, and it's like all the way through
Yes.
it. So yeah, that's kind of the song. That's kind of the story of the song. How it was like, yeah, how it all kind of came together. And then I basically recorded this whole demo in the kitchen of the like in this little room behind the kitchen of the hotel we were staying at. And it virtually ended up being the song like that's on the record. We just finally took it in the studio and like kind of, you know, tweaked it a bit and added a few different things and some live drums, and that was kind of it.
What a story. Oh my gosh.
Sorry, I went for a while then.
No, no, that's fantastic. I was reading on your website before. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what happened when you and your grandma did chat?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I guess like the start of the story of the record, it's quite like a linear story, not in track list, but you know, from sort of start to finish of all the songs on there. The start of it was kind of, you know, the song Aeroplane Bathroom on the record. I'd like gotten on this plane after I'd like, you know, fallen in love with this person. I was kind of keeping it all to myself, and I was like spiraling out of control, being like, oh, what's everyone gonna think, and who's gonna, you know, who's gonna kind of love me at the end of it. And then I, you know, fast forward to that sort of this volcanic moment in Stockholm, and I was again like sort of spiraling, and then I went to Berlin, I went to Greece, which was amazing, for a holiday, and then I ran out of money, surprisingly, and I flew home, and well, actually, I was about to fly home, and then I had to fly to LA for something, and so I kind of got there, and after Stockholm, my dad had been like, "I'll tell mum," as in like he'll tell his mum, my grandma, about your new special friend, and so he very kindly, you know, told her, and I was standing in this car park of this supermarket in LA, and my phone started to ring, and it was my grandma. We called her Amma. Her name was Ailsa, and which was like not unusual. So I was like, "Hey, like, what's up?" And we chatted for a bit, and then she was like, "Look, your dad told me, and I love you, and nothing's ever going to change that." And I was like, like, you know, I was just like, became a puddle on the floor of the car park. And yeah, it was like a pretty beautiful moment. And I flew home. Then I ran out of money, and I flew home, and I went back to work in my summer job at a rose nursery, which was like, you know, 5-minute drive from my parents' house, because I was sort of basically waiting until the following year to start working in a hospital. And so I was home for 6 weeks in Canowindra, which was like quite unusual. I hadn't been home for that long in ages. And I'd go to Arma's house every day after work, and, you know, we'd chat. And then kind of a week into me being home, she became unwell with pneumonia. And so she went into hospital, and she was there for, you know, 4 weeks. And the week before she died, my partner came to meet her, and, you know, we walked into her hospital room, and my grandma was kind of lying in her bed and was just like, and just like put her arms up, and they both embraced. And once again, I was a puddle in the corner of the room. And
wow.
yeah, and then she passed away a week later. And then I wrote the song on the record, Sandwiches, which was kind of the end of the circle. So yeah, it was a pretty, I don't know, I don't think I'll ever be able to write a record like that again, to be honest, because it took a hell of a lot out of me. But, you know, it was really important for me to do. And, you know, it's been really nice sharing the story all year, and sort of I've had countless people, you know, reach out and be like, I listened to this record and then I told my grandma that I was queer, or, you know, whatever else. Yeah. And that's, you know, that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. That's such a beautiful and powerful thing to do, to share your experience in that way, to help other people to process what's going on for them.
Yeah, I mean, it helped me too.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh. I think, yeah, that makes the significance of Volcanic and all the other tracks on the record, for that matter, just like so much more meaningful. And thank you so much for sharing that with me.
My pleasure.
I'd love to hear about the session itself, in terms of how Volcanic came together, if you'd be up for sharing some of the able behind it.
100%. So as I've said, I like haven't really looked at this session in probably a while, so I'll probably go through and people will be looking at it being like, she should not have that compressor there. But you know what? I don't care.
You know what? Those people
everyone can beat it.
Exactly. Those people may not have just been nominated for an ARIA, so
perhaps. Okay. Yeah. So I was talking about being in Berlin at this People Festival, right? And so there were, after I got out of my like moody cave, I looked around. There were like 70 people, like 70 of like the best and bloody brightest musicians in the world, just like hanging out. And there's this guy on the staircase of the funk house. He had this like kind of like an ebow, and he was just holding it on his cello and just kind of playing different notes. And so I just kind of like had my phone in my pocket, and I just kind of pressed record, and I was watching him, and then I just started to walk away. And that is like the bed of Volcanic on the actual record as well. So it's this sound. Which is kind of cool. And it just sort of runs throughout. And then, yeah, so that like ended up kind of like, you know, making it on in the end. And this was kind of the piano riff that I like started with in that warehouse. Was it in a vacuum? So that kind of used to like run underneath it. And then yeah, it was cool because we got like into the studio, and Chris and Zach were like, let's just like cut that part out. And then, yeah, we sort of like put some live drums in there and stuff. And we kind of didn't like need it anymore. So I think that's a cool like songwriting point, is sometimes if you like start with a riff on an instrument or something, you build the entire song around it, and then you take out the core that you sort of built it on. It's like an interesting idea. Yeah, that kind of really, yeah, it was cool. And then I went home that night, as I said, and recorded. There was like a grand piano behind the kitchen. And, you know, a well-known hack is that, I mean, obviously you always want piano in stereo because like it's a beautiful, like wide stereo instrument. But I had one microphone and a shitty little interface. So, and I didn't even have a microphone stand. So I like had this like $150 Audio Technica mic, and I just like lay it in like on kind of in the piano, and I just sort of like played multiple takes and then just like layered them all together and like panned them left and right so that it's like, you know, becomes a stereo piano. Nice. So there's like, yeah, all different. This is kind of like the bridge part. With this go. So it's just kind of multiple different takes. Yeah. And that ended up, all that piano made it on the record. We didn't like re-record any of it. So anyone that's like, you need these mics to record this type of piano, you're like, I literally used $150 microphone and recorded multiple mono piano tracks, and it turned out okay.
Oh, so comforting.
Yeah. So everyone is lying. And yeah, I kind of like then tried to sort of build up like, you know, a drum pattern. So like whenever I kind of think about doing, you know, doing drums, like I'm not a drummer. I don't, I usually just like move things around until they kind of sound, I think they sound good. And so I just like, I had, I don't know, someone gave me some samples somewhere along the line. And I think generally samples usually sound better when they're kind of layered with lots of different stuff. But yeah, this was sort of like the vibe. Like, you know, and I knew it was kind of always going to be a placeholder because I would like want to record proper drums in the end. But it ended up being sort of a reference for like Zach when he was kind of playing drums in the end. Am I burning inside to keep your interests peace? And then I just kind of like varied the pattern a little bit. So here, obviously, I haven't known what a delay plugin is, so I've actually just sort of manually done a delay. And I've just like, just put heaps of them together. Which, how good's that? Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. So that's, yeah, pretty funny. And obviously then they all got scrapped when we got real drums. But that's fun. What's this? Vinyl siren. Cool. Yeah, what else? What else is in there? There's just some
bassy noise.
Yeah, I think there's like all the Ableton shit, like all the free stuff. That's like, you know, whenever I'm making demos, I always use it. I'm like, we'll replace this later. And sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, you know. And then like a little church organ. Yep. It's just some pads. And I think as well, like, you know, having that, I mean, it depends what kind of music you make, right? Like you can do whatever you want. There are no rules, but for the kind of music I make, I was like, I always try and achieve a balance of like, you know, instruments that require microphones and instruments that don't. So like, you know, doing sort of those like soft synths and stuff, but then kind of layered with this cello sample, you know, that kind of like gives it, I don't know, a more sort of like live, natural feel. And that like cello has kind of nice movement and stuff. Yeah, and then you got this really professionally mic'd up piano. I don't think you need anything else.
No.
And then this guy.
Oh, so good.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we, like, by the time we got to, it's not in this session, unfortunately, because it's in the final sort of, you know, final one. But we found this old, like, AM radio at the place that we made the record. And so we just kind of, like, were, like, moving it around. And some guy was, like, talking about bees or something. And so we just kind of recorded that quickly. So if you really listen hard in the final version at this, like, sort of, like, soft piano part, there's this guy talking about bees. Yeah, and then I'm always like, virtually, you know, I think everyone's kind of has like things they come back to, you know, as sort of their like, maybe they develop it as their like signature sound or I don't know, something. But I'm always big into, you know, fucking up my voice and like having that as like another layer in the stuff that I make. As you can see, I just put as many plugins as I could find. And it's just trial and error. Like, you know, I probably didn't know what half of these things were at the time when I put them on, but I was like, no, this sounds pretty good. This sounds pretty good. This sounds pretty good. And so eventually Where did that go? The vocal. Oh, here we go. These guys. Yeah, wild. So that's that, and that's just my normal vocal. Tell you what it's all about if I knew. Which I think that was all on the Audio Technica. But I think maybe we re-recorded the vocals on like a nice like Sony like 637 or something. But yeah, I think, I don't know, it was an interesting like process making a record this time because like I'd been so used to taking like, I know a lot of people, a lot of young and a lot of female artists that will kind of make demos, like build them up until they're like ready to go, and then get into the studio for the producer to be like, nah, scrap all of that, let's like start from the beginning again. And it was really refreshing when I worked with Chris and Zach that like we kind of went in and listened to all the demos of the songs that I had. And there were a couple of them which we were all like, yeah, let's just like start again. But, you know, ones like Volcanic or Airplane Bathroom or, you know, Sandwiches or, you know, a lot of those songs that they were like, it's already all here. Let's just kind of go through and be like, what do we need to, you know, replace? What do we need to redo? Do we need to put in some drums? Do we need to put in some live bass? And it really brought me around to this, you know, this technique of reamping, you know, which is basically like when you've got a stem already in your session and you run it kind of back out through something and then back into the session again. And so that could be like, you know, you're running it out through a guitar amp, re-miking it and then re-recording it. For us, it was often, we found these like old stereos that were in, so I made this record in a little cottage on my parents' farm that's like, was built in like the 1860s and like had like, you know, it was like mouse poo in it. So it was like pretty pretty gnarly sometimes. And we got in there and I was like, I would like turn on a PowerPoint and Mum was like, oh, there's not power to that half of the house. And I was like, okay.
Authentic.
Yeah, I was like, the guys are like, cool, we'll just use this half of the house. But there was this shearing shed opposite and it had like this old stereo that had a wasp's nest in the back. And so we were like banging out the wasp's nests. And then this is what Chris and Zach are really, really good at. They're like, yeah, let's like, I'd never done anything like that before, but they had like a little reamping box. And so they would like run the send back out into the box, into this stereo, and then back into the session. So everything was, you know, kind of being reamped through that. And I'd also bought this Fostex tape machine from Gumtree for like $500. And so we would like run a stem out into the tape machine, re-record it, run that re-recorded one through the tape machine again, like, you know, 12, 13, 14 times until it was sort of really kind of warped. And, you know, doing techniques like that you always hope that like, you know, a plugin can simulate, but like, I don't know, when it's the real thing, it's like, it's pretty fucking cool that it like the way that it kind of degrades and degrades and degrades. And that was, you know, that was the vibe of what we were trying to go for. So yeah, it worked really nicely, but it was cool that I think, you know, again, I keep coming back to this, but like as a young female identifying artist, you're sort of always waiting for like someone to be like, to give you the green light, like, yeah, this is good enough, like this is like, this can make it on your record. And like this last process showed me like, no, you don't need that, you know. I mean, yeah, you should put your trust in some key people whose opinions you really respect, and you should like be receptive to feedback from sort of trustworthy sources. But, you know, because that's the way that you learn, and you are going to make mistakes and you will sometimes make, you know, bad calls, but no one knows the music that you're making better than you. And, you know, you don't need someone else to tell you, oh yeah, this is worthy of kind of going on the record or, you know, whatever else. So, but sometimes you do need that. I still need that, and that's okay. But yeah, you know, find people to work with that like include you in the process, I guess, is kind of, you know, the overall message. Like, even if you don't learn these skills yourself, like find creative partners that make you feel kind of part of the process, and you go through all those like steps together, so you still feel like you're as much a part of it at the end of the master as you were when you first picked up the guitar to write the song.
That's such good advice. I think that makes absolute sense. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of like, particularly like women and gender diverse individuals feeling like they need to have some sense of like arbitrary permission from other people in order for something to be good enough. And like from speaking with people who are looking to get into production so far, particularly when they've been songwriters, I think that's a really powerful thing to be listening to, just that you don't necessarily, like, no one needs to tell you that it's good enough in order for it to be good enough, and you can trust your own instincts and work with people who make you feel more confident rather than less.
Oh, 100%. And I think like just get some yardsticks for yourself, like I remember when we'd go into the studio every morning, like with Chris and Zach, Zach would always like put on, like some songs that I thought we were just like, yeah, we're all vibing these songs, we're all just like listening to the songs, but like he was doing it because he's like getting his ears ready for like, okay, this is kind of the sound quality that we're going for, and so then like if you're, I mean, obviously you can be a bit blinded sometimes, if it's your own music, but like you should like, listen through the same set of headphones or same set of speakers to like a song that you think is really good, that's in the same ballpark as what you're doing, and then put your song on, like A, B it, put on your song straight afterwards and be like, does this stand up against that one? That's a relatively like objective measure that you can make, and those sorts of things are important. Those distinctions are important, but like, a lot of the time what you're getting is just someone else's opinion, which, can be valid or can be irrelevant. And you ultimately decide that. But yeah, I think like, this isn't to say just like march off and do your own thing and never worry about anything again, because like, I think there are some parameters that you should at least think about and be aware of, so you end up delivering something that you're proud of and that's serves the song really well. But yeah, I think people saying all these rules and stuff, and like that use these mics or these interfaces or these, all this record I made on like with an SM7, which is not a crazy, it's expensive microphone, or like this Audio Technica that was $150 on a Steinberg interface, which was like $150. So yeah, really most of my record up until the recording process cost me $300.
Amazing.
I think like the upgrading of gear and stuff is, like that's just for your enjoyment really. It's like makes it nicer. But that's actually another like, one thing to mention is, people are always like, buy the best monitors or buy the best headphones or whatever, which is great for sure. If you can afford that, go for it. But if you can't, like, just get really familiar with a particular, like with a set of headphones, like even if it's your goddamn Apple headphones, like, because the point of that is that you can compare mixes, like when you're getting a final mix back on your song, you need to listen to it through something that you're really familiar with. So like, I mean, obviously if you have nice expensive headphones, you can hear all the panning and you can hear all the details and stuff. But, in terms of like the end, what you're trying to get to, the end product, you just need to be able to like go and listen to your favorite Taylor Swift song or whatever, and then listen to your song and be like, okay, like, is this mix kind of, on par? Is it like, if this goes out to the radio, will it sound good? And if you're really familiar with the source that you're listening on, then you can kind of make that decision. But you can work with whatever you got.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I mean, this was like, I made this session before I had any real like, plugins or whatever. But so like this, I use this analog tapes channel strip, kind of use that. I used to use that a lot. Now that I've, wasted more money on plugins, like this motherfucker is, except for the hiss function, this little guy, I probably would have, were I making this now, I probably would have just absolutely. Fuck that up. And then these guys. Audio thing, super cheap, super cool. Plugins, just like, look at them. They're so cute.
Oh, so good.
I think, yeah, so I probably would have used these, but the actual things I used at the time were just sort of all the like free the free Ableton stuff. And you know, when you're thinking about, it's probably a range of people watching this with a range of skills, and you're going to be like, are you about to talk to me about EQ? But like, you know, again, to reinforce, I have no background in audio engineering. It's like a process of trial and error. Great place to start when you're using EQ is just with the presets. So it's like this preset is a snare EQ. So like if you have no idea what you're doing, you can at least start with it in the snare EQ position, and then you just move it around until it feels nice. And you know, you'll be like playing live, and some guy at the front of the house will be like, turn down the 2K or whatever. And that, I'm starting to like sound like a drunk auntie. But like that, you know, there are like, what I learned during my last record was like, it's cool if you, like you can almost like fish around for the bad frequencies. So if you're kind of like playing something, like playing a stem, like you'll be moving this around and suddenly you'll hear like a kind of thing. And then you just want to duck that right down, because that's the shit that you want to get out of your music. Those like the things that dogs hear, you know. And yeah, I mean, I like now spend a lot of time reading about like what are good EQs and what are good compressors, and there's a lot of like cool information out there, so you can like go ahead and read that. But yeah, I think like usually in terms of like learning anything about, you know, making stuff sound a bit nicer than when you just straight up record it into the computer, reading a bit about EQ and compression is like, you know, it's a really cool place to start. And you know, people talk about outboard and like plugins and all that stuff, but you just work with whatever budget you got, and you can make stuff sound nice. But yeah, I think in terms of like the plugins on this, Forest Floor, what's that? Sound cool. Kind of sounds better without it. This one, there's some cool like panning. When I first discovered like panning kind of plugins, like this Ableton one around the head, that's really cool. And that's like, I like, as I talk, I'm like, this reminds me of another thing.
I love that.
Yeah, but the you know, panning is really important, because like panning is often what creates a lot of space in the mix. So like if you're kind of listening to something and it's all in the center, you don't get that nice sort of wide, you know, stereo vibe. When I first like, I kind of do this less now, but when I first started recording, I would always record 3 vocal takes, and I'd always kind of have one in the center and then one pan hard left, one pan hard right. So you kind of get that widescreen vocal effect. But you know, it comes down to choice again. When I made my second record, I was like, actually, I kind of want a more like vulnerable single, you know, vocal take thing. But yeah, like some, you know, when you get to like, you've got kind of the, you know, your vocals, which are that sort of front and center. You've kind of got the meat and the sandwich, which is like the pads and the piano, and then you've got the bottom end, which is like the bass and some of those like, you know, kick drums and stuff. But all that like extra color, like the little like synth bloops you might have, or like some of these like little, that's a kick, so definitely not that, but like, you know, some of these little like hat samples and stuff, like that stuff, you know, and a lot of those vocal effects, like I would always sort of like, you know, adjust the panning so it kind of fills in those nice little spaces that you've created.
I'd love to hear about any like hacks that you have, just any kind of go-to tricks, if you're willing to share your secrets, of course.
Oh, I don't know if I have any. So when you're like recording stuff in, and you're like, and it's peaking or it's like jumping all over the shop, you know, adjusting the gain. So I was always advised, so it comes in around about -14 dB. Nice. Good hack, because then you can like when you sort of add compression, add all these plugins, it slowly starts to kind of come up. You know, you slowly sort of start to like sculpt the dynamics, or else if you record something in pretty hot or pretty close to 0 dB, you've just kind of got less room to move in terms of like, you know, shaping the dynamics and stuff like that. I think like, you know, obviously like I send all my stuff or like to someone else to mix, because I do acknowledge that I am, you know, like perhaps not quite at a point where I feel comfortable that I would like mix something and it would be the best version of that song. But when you're thinking about, you know, recording stuff in, like I always think about what's, you know, what's space, comes back to space. What space is this occupying in the mix? You know, is it occupying a lower end? In that case, you're going to be, you know, making it like occupy that lower end. If it's, you know, that kind of occupying in the middle in terms of EQ, it's going to occupy the mid zone. And then if it's just sort of like some little high guy that's floating off into the distance, then, you know, it's going to kind of occupy that space. Yeah, I mean, the vocal thing, like I generally just get an SM7 and just sit at my desk and just plug it into the interface. And then I just like literally trial and error plugins until I've kind of got something that sounds good, and then just like put it on loop and record and record and record. And then I go through it and like pick out the best parts, because like, you know, I often find that like a whole take is just, it oversaturates what I'm trying to do, or else it's just like a little kind of detail. So I'll like pick out like, you know, a couple of bars here and there and place them, usually place them at like transition points. So, you know, coming from the first verse into the chorus, or, you know, if you're going by a kind of classic structure, or going into the bridge, because, you know, so the person listening to it is kind of like, oh shit, this is like a new section, a new vibe.
I think you already spoke about some before as well, in terms of layering, you know, sounds that have to be recorded in a microphone and sounds that don't, to kind of get a bit of an interesting blend. I think that's an excellent hack.
Yeah, that's really like, it is, you know, I think it's like a scales thing. So like I often find if it's, you know, getting too heavy on one end, then I kind of like try to bring it back. And, you know, like recording stuff differently, like rather than recording everything in the song with the same, like in the same sort of setup, like, you know, often if I'm recording acoustic guitar while I'm recording it on like a nice like on a nice microphone or something, I'll just set up my phone and press record for the same sort of take while I'm doing it. And so then like kind of have that as a second take. That's just like adding, you know, it's all about adding like a bit of texture. So rather than, I mean, it depends what you're going for. If you're going for a nice clean sound, that's obviously not what you want. But if you're sort of going for, you know, that kind of bit more character or texture, then sort of thinking about, you know, different ways of recording, like go and record a vocal take in the bathroom, you know, on your phone or whatever it is, and kind of fly it into the session. And it doesn't have to have pride of place. It can just be like a little background element that sort of, you know, adds to the overall feel of the song. It is. That's kind of something I always come back to, is like, you know, having a little pulse like somewhere. And that's, you know, that pulse isn't really like front and center. It kind of just like fades into the background. But yeah, it can, you know, basically the pulse doesn't always have to be the drums. That's kind of the point.
Amazing. Is there any other bits that you wanted to go through on Ableton, or is that kind of most of the heroes of that particular demo?
Yeah, I think of this particular demo, it is, I don't know if it's like, if it's, you know, worth like looking at other, I don't know, like if people want to see other plugins that I think are cool, or
yeah.
I
feel like I mean, I definitely would.
Yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, I think like just, again, because I made, like, if I had made this today, I would have probably used different stuff, which again reflects just how quickly you like, you know, grow and find new things and, you know, all that shit. But I kind of showed those audio things. that one I got for free. So FabFilter, have a really nice compressor called the Pro C2, which I used a lot on my record. And that's like, tends to be like the way, it's like you'll go and work with someone and they'll use something and then you're like, I must have this. And then you'll go and buy it yourself. So that's kind of why I've got most things. Isotope, I actually used this on your vocals the other day. This nectar thing, and it's just like, it just eliminates any shit, you know. And look at
See
this.
why you needed it on my vocals.
No, I didn't need it. But like, what are you going for? I think I clicked vintage on yours.
Oh, beauty. Yeah.
Probably moderate, because, you know. And then it's right. Anyway, it does some cool shit. So I used that the other day.
Is it like a de-esser?
Yes, yeah. It's kind of like a de-esser, and just sort of like, you know, eliminates a lot of background noise, and just like, it's basically like clarifies it a little bit.
Nice.
And something that does a similar thing that I also used on your voice is this Soothe 2, which again I bought because I saw Chris and Zach using it a heap on my record. And it's just really, really cool. Again, like, you know, smooths out a lot of any little bumps. And if I can recommend to anybody, if everyone's like, I don't know any plugins, like what are plugins? Wait until Black Friday, which is about a year from now. But otherwise, just because they're when the sales are. But otherwise, buy Sound Toys, because Sound Toys are really cool, and I basically use them on everything, especially this Devil Lock. So say if I'm just playing this, just kind of fucks it up a bit, makes it nice and dark. I use that on heaps and heaps of stuff. And Little Altar Boy.
Oh, we love to see it.
This is really cool. If you haven't listened to the Emma Louise record, what's it called? Come on, I'm gonna look it up. Let's see. It's like Lie Like Everything. It's like, it got to the mixing point, and then the cool and probably pretty ballsy mix engineer was like, you know what we should do? We should like pitch the whole thing down like a couple of, like, or format it down, pitch it down a couple of semitones. Which I'm like, if I sent my whole album to a mix engineer and they were like, do this, I'd be like, what? But they made the very correct decision. And so like, you can just like, sounds terrible on the piano. Sounds really cool on voice.
You've got a little voice snippet just above there. If you
here we go.
Breaking and lights up myself.
Oh, amazing.
So that's really cool. And then, I mean, the UAD, that's like a whole different world. So I'm not going to go into that. Valhalla, this is my favorite reverb. Use it on everything. And a good little hack is that when you're using reverb, if you take away, like, if you kind of do that sort of like low cut, because often when you use reverb, it just adds heaps of like wool to the mix. Like, it just sort of makes it really like thick soup in not a good way. And so if you kind of cut out the reverb, like basically that's cutting out reverb on like the low end, then it just means you can kind of just get the reverb on that, like on the higher frequencies, and it doesn't kind of muddy it as much. So that's really cool. And this little guy I just bought, and I think it's gonna be really nice.
Is that the tape one?
Yeah, it's kind of another tape one.
Volcanic, high that won't stop breaking, and the voice is tired of breaking, and that's not myself right up.
Yeah, so just some cool shit. I think, like, you know, with all this stuff, it's a real balance of like, I think when I probably first started doing this, I was like, yeah, just put all this stuff on everything. And then the mixers were like, whoa, there's a lot going on in there. So I think, like, you know, like when I was working with my friend Chris, he was like, let's like push it as far as it can go to one end, like, and then we can always like rein it in. And so that's like, I think that's a good way to think about it. You know, if you're using some of this stuff, like, you know, you can push it really far, but then maybe bring it back like 20%, and that's probably the sweet spot. And, you know, again, talking about having a mix between like the natural and the electronic. Again, I try and kind of keep that balance in mind when I'm thinking about plugins. So, you know, I'm not going to take plugins on every single thing in the mix, because then it just kind of all gets into the same zone. Whereas, like, I think the point of using plugins like that is to add different colors. So, like, you know, having it on one thing when another thing sounds sort of a bit cleaner and nice, like that contrast is sort of what is exciting to me. And then probably one other thing I can talk about is like making your own samples. So like and then just pinching samples wherever you can find them. So like, you know, if you've recorded something, you suddenly have a whole thing of samples. If you go and cut up, you know, an individual kick sound or whatever, and building up a bit of a bank of those is really cool. And I generally do it like, you know, with sort of more soundscape stuff, and I just do it on my phone and then bounce it into like a hard drive on my computer. And so like, you know, I don't know, this one called Almonds. This is me brushing my teeth. This is the guitar loop that I made. I make a song out of that. This is a bell. What else we got? Tea strainer.
Oh.
A forest. A street. Piano strings.
I definitely want to hear the sheep.
Oh yeah, sheeps.
Sheeps. Nice, nice.
Wait, it's gonna get to a climax soon. Come on.
Just warming up.
Yeah. I think I remember making this sample because when you walk towards sheep or sheeps, they run away from you. So I was like, come back.
So just imagining Gordi running through a paddock chasing the sheep with her iPhone at this point.
I'm like, guys, I'm trying to make a sample. You don't understand. So yeah, I think that's like a cool thing to do. And, you know, it came into play a lot when I was making my record because, you know, we tried to like put as many of those in as we could. And that's like, you know, coming back to this song, we like the Man with the Bees, or, you know, whatever it was, we put in like a few different samples that we'd recorded from around the house and around the farm to sort of, you know, put it in a place, which was cool.
Oh my gosh, so many amazing hacks. I loved all those samples. So good. It just makes me want to go and sample like literally everything. Consensually, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Always important.
Always important
before you record the sheep.
Absolutely. And yeah, particularly with the sheep. Yeah, for sure. Oh gosh, thank you so much for going through that session in so much detail.
No, my pleasure. Sorry, I hope it was yeah, I think
it was a gold mine.
It's fine. Yeah, no worries. All the forest floor.
Yes, so good. I should totally like retroactively go and ask all of those plugins to sponsor.
Yes. Definitely.
It's like,
definitely do it.
Please give the artists free plugins. We're shouting you out. Oh my gosh. Amazing. Well, I think in the last couple of times, like the last couple of sessions, I've asked more kind of philosophical questions, but I sort of feel like we've covered a fair few like philosophical things. Yes. So maybe I'll ask like one last question and then do some like what's coming up next kind of stuff if you're up
Great.
for it.
Yeah, cool.
Woohoo! Awesome. So I think after hearing so much about your process and also going through the session in so much detail, I'd love to know if there are any particular things that you wish you knew or wish someone had have told you like say 3 years ago, or at whatever time you were transitioning from being like a songwriter going into like a songwriter who's interested in production?
Yeah, I think one of them in terms of like audio, sort of in terms of engineering and production, is often less is more. Like I think even looking at my session there, like if you've got, I don't know, 10 plugins on something, like go back and like mute some of them and think like, does this make a difference? Or, you know, and so like clear out all the clutter out of the mix. You know, and I think that sort of idea of keeping the scales like balanced is something I've sort of learned along the way, but I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. Just like, you know, really distill what's the end vision here? Like, what do I want this to sort of sound like? What, you know, where am I going with this? And keep that, like, you know, keep that goalpost in, you know, in your mind as you're kind of going through the process. Again, you know, the validation thing, like, you don't if you need validation, that's okay, but you know, it's not essential. I think surround yourself with some people who you know, are good at what they do, but also want to help you and want to see you kind of grow, and want to involve you in the process. And you know, many great records were made with fucking none of this, like with, you know, so I think, yeah, all of this stuff is cool and it's fun to play with, and it's, you know, it's fun to like change your sound and discover new things. But you know, your literacy can, like your music literacy can literally be, how do I just get sound from here into there, and like that is, you could make a great record like that. So I think don't get too bogged down in the rules, but you know, pick up stuff along the way, like learn from people, and you know, just, yeah, do your thing, stick to your vision, because you'll get a lot of relevant feedback along the way all the time, and it's your job to sift through it and be like, is this kind of serving like the song? But yeah, I think again, oh my god, there's a cat who's just appeared in this room.
Oh, wonderful.
How did you get in here? Yeah, let me just get the cat out of the room. How did you get in here, little guy? My final thought is, you know, this, like, being like, learn about production and engineering isn't supposed to make you be like, I don't know anything about that. It's just like, you know, what is like, what are the things that can empower you most in like a studio setting or in like a recording setting, and it's just about getting those skills, or finding people who give you empowerment in the studio, so you're not like the thousands of, you know, young women who've sat in studios time and time again being like, I have no idea what's going on, and they're just like being like, do you like this? And you're like, so it's kind of just like, you know, put yourself back in the driver's seat. Have I said enough sort of like cliched metaphors? I think so.
Oh no, so good, so good. And yeah, I mean, at the risk of being like cliched myself, like not that you have it all, you've been great, but I think it absolutely does matter, like your opinion as well. So like if you're surrounding yourself with people who really care about your opinion and care about your vision for the song, like you can also kind of, you know, when you're in those safe spaces, you can also like kind of give yourself permission and remind yourself that like your opinion does matter. And like, even if you know, you don't have to have all of the technical knowledge for your opinion to matter, because you're often also the person who wrote the song, you know.
Totally. And that carries the most currency.
Amazing. So if people want to like binge on your music, what should they do?
I think go on your usual music platform, or better yet, buy a record if you've got a record player, and listen to Our Two Skins start to finish. I put it out in June and I care a lot about it, and I'm very proud of it. So that's probably a good jumping off point.
Amazing. Excellent. And I'm hearing that you're playing a lot more shows, so people can also go to a show.
yeah, I'm very excited to do my job again.
Yay! Amazing. Well, thank you so much for having a chat with me.
No worries, always a pleasure.
Yay! All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'm gonna.
Thank you.
Sliding off.